Welcome back to Esther's Legacy, for we are here for such a time as this. I want to go ahead and ask you to like and share the video. Today we are going to be in Revelation chapter 13, 11 through 18. So let's get started because today we're on the false prophet. Last week we did the Antichrist, and today we're going to be doing the false prophet. So let's begin in verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. It had 2 horns, like those of a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. Okay, let's go into this verse a little bit. This word for earth can be translated land. The beast came up out of the earth. And remember when we talked about the beast coming up out of the sea, we talked about it in terms of coming out of the nations as well. And so we have here a beast coming out of the earth or coming out of the land. It may very well be that this particular beast, this false prophet, is coming out of the land of Israel. Let me explain. In Islam, they have their Messiah, the Mahdi. That is the beast that came up out of the sea. They believe that Jesus will also return and come back, and that he will tell people to worship the beast that came out of the sea, the Mahdi, okay, their Messiah, who is supposed to also bear the name Muhammad. And so this false Jesus may very well be from the land of Israel. I am not saying he is Jewish, but he may be from the land of Israel. And even if he were even just a part Jewish, remember, Herod the Great was part Jewish and was no lover of the Jewish people. All he cared about was himself. And so don't let that throw you with me saying there's a possibility that he may come from the land. And this particular beast has 2 horns. He has 2 horns like a lamb. And so he is presenting himself as the opposite of the lamb. Okay? He's presenting himself as a false lamb. This false lamb is going to be pointing and getting people to worship the beast that came up out of the sea. He speaks like a dragon, okay? The dragon. He speaks, he has the words of Satan in his mouth. This false prophet, perhaps false Jesus, okay? So we have to understand that there are things that are already set in motion within Islam that they believe, that they are expecting, and this is one of those things. They are expecting a Jesus figure to return and tell people to worship the Mahdi, this new Muhammad, okay, who is the embodiment of Satan. So I want us to take a look at chapter 16, verses 13 and 14. And we'll see a little bit more of that idea of him speaking like the dragon in these verses. Verse 13, and I saw 3 unclean spirits that looked like frogs. They came from the mouth of the dragon, from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. So the dragon and the beast that comes up out of the sea and this beast from the land or from the earth all speak with the same froggish tongue. Okay? These frogs, these unclean spirits that look like frogs, are coming up out of their mouth. Verse 14, they are miracle working demonic spirits which go out to the kings of the whole inhabited world to assemble them for the war of the great day of Adonai Zavaot, the war of Armageddon. So they're coming out of the mouths trying to get those kings. Remember, the Antichrist will have 10 kings that rule along with him. And these kings are going to have to come together with the Antichrist, the false prophet, and the dragon to come against the true Yeshua, the true Messiah of God, when he comes down out of heaven. And they do that by deception, by lies, and by having these miraculous signs to convince the leaders of the world to go along with them. So they speak like the dragon, they, the beast, the Antichrist, and this false prophet. Okay? The Antichrist would be the equivalent to the Mahdi in Islam. The false prophet would be the equivalent of their understanding of the return of Jesus. And so we see here in verse 12, what does this false prophet do? It exercises all the authority of the first beast, the Antichrist, in its presence. And it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, the one whose fatal wound had been healed. Now, if you remember when we talked about the Antichrist and when we talked about that fatal wound, we talked about it also in terms of the kingdom of the Antichrist having received a fatal wound and come back. The Islamic kingdom receiving a fatal wound, so to speak, when World War I took place and the Ottoman Empire was no more. Well, in order to have a kingdom, an empire, you must have a king. And so the kingdom and the king go hand in hand. What happens to one may very well happen to the other. And so just because the kingdom received a fatal blow does not mean that the actual Antichrist will not receive what appears to be a fatal wound. Okay? He may also receive a fatal wound, and it appears, according to these verses here, that that is the case. So he receives this fatal wound. Verse 13, it performs great miracles, even causing fire to come down from heaven onto the earth as people watch. Now remember, chapter 16 also talked about the Antichrist and the false prophet doing miracles. Okay? They're trying to get the kings to come to Armageddon. Here we see that these miracles even include fire coming down from heaven onto the earth as people watch. So they're doing it for the purpose of display. They're doing it for the purpose, or the false prophet is doing it for the purpose of saying, look at me, listen to me, do what I tell you. I am telling you to worship the Antichrist, to worship the beast that came up out of the sea. Okay? Do what I tell you to do. But this idea that it's calling down fire from heaven, I want to look at that a little bit. And these miracles, these idea of these miracles. Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. Let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 13, and we're going to read verses 1 through 3. Okay. If a prophet or someone who gets messages while dreaming arises among you, and he gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign or wonder comes about as he predicted when he said, let's follow other gods, follow the beast out of the sea, follow the Antichrist, right? Follow the false Messiah, which you have not known. In other words, also follow the dragon, and let us serve them. You are not to listen to what that prophet or dreamer says, for Adonai, your God, is testing you in order to find out whether you really do love Adonai, your God, with all your heart and being. He's testing you. He's saying this to the people of God. So when this happens, when this false prophet comes, he can perform miracles. But if he tells you to worship someone other than the God of the Bible, which is what he will do, he will set the God of the Bible up as the bad guy. Because when the true Messiah from the true God comes down out of heaven, he's going to want people to fight alongside of him. And so here God is saying, beware of that and don't follow that prophet. Don't follow that prophet. He's a false prophet. Now let's look at Matthew 24:24. Matthew 24:24. It says, for there will appear false messiahs and false prophets. There have been false messiahs and false prophets, performing great miracles, amazing things, so as to fool even the chosen if possible. They're trying to get God's people away from God. Okay? Muhammad did that. The Antichrist will do that. Muhammad had his followers. The Antichrist will have the false prophet and his followers. Those 10 kings. But he also says that it's not just miracles that they are going to perform. They're not just trying to fool God's people in this sense. They're also trying to mimic God. Mimic God. Let's look at 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 18. We're going to read verses 36 through 39. And then when it came time for offering the evening offering, Eliyahu, the prophet, approached and said, Adonai, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, Adonai, hear me, so that this people may know that you, Adonai, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back to you. Then the fire of Adonai fell. It consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, Adonai is God! Adonai is God! And Eliyahu, said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal, and don't let one of them escape. And they seized them, and Eliyahu brought them down to the Wadi Gishon and killed them there. And so this is the battle between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Prophets of false God, false names, okay, against the prophet of God. And here the prophet of God is calling down fire from heaven when the prophets of Baal could not. Well, it would appear that we have here in this instance with the false prophet in Revelation 13, for some reason, God is allowing this false prophet to call down fire onto the earth, come down out of heaven and onto the earth. But make no mistake, that does not make him a true prophet, because God is testing his people. Okay, you saw Elijah do that. Now you're seeing this one do that. And remember, one of the things that is said about Elijah is that he will come before the day of the Lord. And Yeshua called John the Immerser, John the Baptist, he called him the Elijah that was to come. Well, this particular false prophet is able to call down fire from heaven. But just because he can do that, if he is leading you to another God, if he is leading you away from the God of the Bible, then he is the false prophet. That fire down from heaven is meant to confuse and to deceive even the people of God, if possible. And so he does this miracle of the fire coming down from heaven onto the earth. In verse 14 and 15, I want us to read together. Okay? Verse 14, it deceives the people living on earth by the miracles it is allowed to perform in the presence of the beast. See, he's performing these miracles and able to point to the Antichrist, to the beast out of the sea, and say, follow him. And it tells them to make an image honoring the beast that was struck by the sword but came alive again. So now we see that this fatal wound that was healed is from a sword. It is from a sword. But he tells the people to build an image in honor of the beast out of the sea. Let's go on to verse 15. It was allowed to put breath into the image of the beast so that the image of the beast could even speak. And it was allowed to cause anyone who would not worship the image of the beast to be put to death. This account right here should sound very familiar. Let's turn to Daniel, the book of Daniel, and let's go to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. Do you remember the image that Nebuchadnezzar erected in his honor? Verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had a gold statue made 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, which he set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. This image, this statue, this thing that he had the people erect is 90 feet tall and only 9 feet wide. This is not a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. That would be a really, really disproportioned statue. A long, drawn out, stretched out statue of a person. No, this is more like what you would find. This is a tall, thin tower. It is made out of gold because God told Nebuchadnezzar through Daniel that he was the head of gold. So he's the gold kingdom. And so he erects this tower-like statue, and makes it of gold. It represents him and his kingdom. Verse 2, and then Nebuchadnezzar the king summoned the viceroys, prefects, governors, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and all the provincial officials to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue or of this monolith which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood in front of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and a herald proclaimed. Okay? In many ways, you might say this Herald is equivalent to the false prophet. A herald proclaim peoples, nations, languages. You are ordered that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, harp, zither, lute, bagpipe, and the rest of the musical instruments, you are to fall down and worship the gold statue, the gold monolith that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship is to be thrown immediately into a blazing hot furnace. So from this tower, this monolith, this statue, and think of the Middle East. Egypt has tall, thin monoliths, right? Think of Islam. Think of the pyres that come from Islamic mosques. I'm thinking word synagogue. I'm like, that's definitely not right. Their mosques, their Islamic mosques have these pyres, these tall, thin pyres, and these pyres speak as if they have breath. And they call the Muslims to prayer and to bow. To bow to their God. In the days of John would have had no idea what a loudspeaker was. So if he saw this tall, thin monolith and words were coming out of it, it would be as if this statue, this monolith, had breath, had a voice. And I'm not saying that something miraculous is not going to happen. I'm just saying it might not be as miraculous as we typically tend to think. It might be something that we are very familiar with. Calling people to worship, to bow down and worship the Antichrist and the dragon. And if they do not, in Daniel's day, they were thrown into a hot, fiery furnace. In the day of the Antichrist, if they do not, the false prophet has the authority to have them killed. And the book of Revelation talks about beheadings. But there is nothing new under the sun. Nothing new. If we turn back to Matthew 24, Matthew chapter 24, let's look at verse 15. So when you see the abomination that causes desolation, this image set up in honor of the Antichrist, calling people to bow down and worship the Antichrist, to worship the beast out of the sea. spoken about through the prophet Daniel, standing where? In the holy place. Standing in the holy place. Let the reader understand the allusion. That will be the time for those in Judah to escape to the hills. This statue, this monolith, this image of the beast, this talking, if you will, image, whether it be a pyre on the top of a mosque or like the pyres we see in Egypt, like the big huge monoliths you see in Egypt, words coming out demanding worship, a call to worship. There is already something like that on the Temple Mount today. But this is going to be something even more specific on the Temple Mount. When the Antichrist himself comes in and the false prophet next to him, this Mahdi, this another Muhammad, along with their version of Jesus, comes in and this thing is erected and it speaks and demands that people bow down and worship. That is something more specific than what we see even today. When this happens, there will be a functioning altar and, from all indications from Scripture, a functioning temple on the Temple Mount. And they will go in to the temple and set up an abomination of desolation in the holy place, calling people to worship. This false prophet, this deceiver, this one who does false miracles, even calling down fire from heaven, calling people to worship the Antichrist, who's been slain with a sword. The sword is also symbolic of war. And swords are one of Islam's symbols. They even use it in the calligraphy of their writing. And we will see that in just a few minutes. So here we are. We see that this abomination of desolation has been set up in the holy place. And for the inhabitants of the earth, it is a life and death situation. Will they worship? Will they worship? Will they receive the mark of the beast? Will they worship? You see, the mark of the beast that we're about to talk about and the worship of the beast go hand in hand. They go together. It is not simply a mark in order to buy and sell. It is a mark of worship. back in the early days of Christianity, when the emperors were seen as gods, it was considered treasonous not to offer sacrifice at the temple of the Caesar. And so sometimes, in order to avoid being labeled a traitor, in order to get those papers that said that you had worshipped at the temple of the Caesar, they would actually hire people and get them to go do that for them. But they're not actually doing it. They claim to be believers in Jesus, in Christ. They're a Christian, so they can't go do that. But they need that piece of paper, that mark that they had done something. The worship of the image and the mark are going to go hand in hand, just like it did in the time of the Caesars. Remember what it said in chapter 14, verse 9 of Revelation. It said, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives the mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will indeed drink the wine of God's fury, poured undiluted into the cup of his rage. He will be tormented by fire. What was going to happen to people if they didn't worship in Daniel? Tormented by fire and sulfur before the holy angels and the Lamb, and the smoke from their tormenting goes up forever and ever. The worship of the beast, the worship of his image, and the mark of the beast go hand in hand. They go together. It's not strictly an economic decision to receive the mark. It is falling down and worshiping at this image, at this abomination that causes desolation. Let's go on to verse 16. Also, it forces everyone, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark, a sign, a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, preventing anyone from buying or selling unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This is where wisdom is needed. Those who understand should count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person, of a man. And its number is 666. Now, this word for number, arithos, where we get the word arithmetic, can also be translated multitude. And there's a reason I say that. Because this number is also the multitude of the beast. This number of the beast is the multitude of the beast. The beast and the people of the beast go together. Just like the beast and the false prophet go together. The beast and his multitude go together. Those who have worshipped his image and received this mark that they had worshipped the image. So it's also his multitude. Yes, it will prevent anyone from buying or selling unless they have this mark. Unless they can show that they had worshipped the image, they will not be allowed to buy or sell. And where does that mark go? And we've talked about this before. It goes on the forehead and on the right hand. It is a mimic of when God told his people to put his word on their forehead and on their hand. And they have done that with the tefillin, with the phylacteries. So it is a copycat of the tefillin. It is the number, the multitude of the name and the reputation. Name also means reputation. In a Hebraic perspective, name, the word for name in Hebrew is Shem, and it means name and reputation. Remember, scripture says a good name, right, is to be desired even more than much silver and gold, right? So you have here this name, but it is not a good name. It is a blasphemous name. And so this number, this counting or understanding or reckoning this number, this multitude that goes along with the beast. What is their mark? What is their symbol? What is the symbol of the multitude who goes under the name or the reputation of the beast? I want to show you something, okay? What you see here, I'm not sure if this is actually the name of this mark is correct. I found this picture. I put it here because I want you to see the symbols, okay? Down at the bottom, you have the Greek spelling of 666. Okay? It's a key, a Z, and a stigma. You're like, okay, that's interesting. Well, it gets even more interesting when you understand that this is the only place in the New Testament you ever see the letter stigma. It is a letter that was not really used by this time. It's an ancient letter that fell out of use. But John calls it back. John uses it here. Why? Because he could have just gone to the next letter in Greek for the number 6, which was what this letter stigma would represent. The chi is the X symbol, and then you have what looks like a cursive E, that's the Z symbol, and then last you have the stigma. And numerically it is 6 when you put it in the alphabet. But when it was taken out, the next letter just automatically became 6. He could have done that. He's used all those other letters already within the New Testament. This is the only time that this particular letter in Greek is used in the New Testament. Now, if you will look above it, what you see is the calligraphy Arabic And that's important because it's not just written Arabic. This is the fancy calligraphy that they put on their flags. Okay? And you see the X of two swords. Remember, I told you that a sword is also used in their calligraphy, in their writing. So you see this X, these two swords coming together. Then you see the cursive E symbol. What we're going to see when we look at this in just a moment on one of their flags, it's not going to be upright like this. It's going to be turned like this. So it's going to be on its side. But it looks like that cursive E on its side. And then you have this stigma looking letter. Okay? The phrase is the crossed swords in the name of Allah, or the crossed swords also represent war, could represent an army. This is the army in the name of Allah. Okay? That's what you see here. The crossed swords in the name of Allah. The stigma is in the name of, and that cursive E, that Z looking symbol, is Allah. It stands for Allah. So you have here the calligraphy, not the modern day Arabic, but the calligraphy of the crossed swords being like a military. So the military in the name of Allah. Okay. Now I'm going to show it to you on one of their flags. Okay. You will see here, you've got to look in the middle of the flag. You will see, and you want to go the opposite of what you're thinking. So start over here and come this way. Okay? Okay. You're going to start on the left and move toward the right as you read this. It's like Hebrew. Okay? It's left to right. You see in the middle, you see the crossed swords. Next to it on top, you see the sideways cursive E or Z symbol. And underneath that, you will see what looks like this stigma symbol right in the center. And they put this particular phrase, they put these particular symbols on many of their flags, on many of their headbands that they wear, or their armbands that they'll wear. John had no idea of what Islam was in his day. Had no idea of who Muhammad was going to be. None less the final caliph, the final king of Islam, the eighth king, the Antichrist, the beast out of the sea. All he knew is he was seeing symbols of an army, of a beast, of the dragon. And these were the symbols he saw. These seem to have been the symbols he saw. Coincidence? Do you believe in coincidence? Because God knew. God knew what was coming. I don't believe in coincidences. God is all-knowing. And so when he was showing John a vision of the future, if he was showing him a vision of the future Antichrist and false prophet, this image, this mark, John didn't know the significance of everything he was seeing. He just knew it was the ultimate false Messiah, the ultimate bad guy that would eventually come and would literally set itself up against the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his Messiah. That's what John knew. That's what John is trying to describe. Now, I say that in all humility. I could be wrong. But it sure is an awfully big coincidence if I am. I am not God. I am obviously not John the Apostle, seeing the vision. I am just looking at what is actually there in text and understanding that the seventh has already come and we are looking for the eighth. And it comes out of the seven. And it comes from the seventh. The kingdom that had a fatal blow. And just trying, just like the rest of you, to understand what it is John is trying to say. The sad part is that for us in our generation, unfortunately, what I've been talking about and what I've been saying makes perfect sense. And again, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But it sure does seem to make sense. And we as the people of God have got to be extra, extra diligent. I want to read you one more passage about the image, the abomination of desolation. And it's out of Daniel again. And this time it's in Daniel 11. Daniel chapter 11. And we're going to read verses 31 through 35. Armed forces will come at his order, at his order, and profane the sanctuary and the fortress. So this armed military, remember we talked about the military in the name of Allah? We talked about the multitude, the army of the beast being the eighth king. Armed forces will come at his order and profane the sanctuary and fortress. They will abolish the daily burnt offering and set up the abomination that causes desolation. So we have to have the sacrifices back in play in order for them to be stopped. And they have to be true sacrifices and consecrated sacrifices in order for the enemy to come in and stop them and to desecrate the altar. Those who act wickedly against the covenant, he will corrupt with his blandishments, with his false miracles. Those who are acting wickedly against the covenant, those who are lawless, who do not want to obey God, But the people who know their God will stand firm and prevail. Those among the people who have discernment will cease or will cause the rest of the people to understand what is happening. Nevertheless, for a while they will fall victim to sword, fire, exile, and pillage. The sword and captivity. And yes, along with that goes fire and pillage. We saw that on October 7th. They burned the houses, they burned the people, and they pillaged. And when they stumble, they will receive a little help, although many who join them will be insincere. They're not really going to stay in it for the long haul. Remember, God is testing his people. God tests his people. God will test his people with the false prophet. Verse 35, even some of those with discernment will stumble, so that some of them will be refined, purified, and cleansed for an end yet to come at the designated or appointed time. At the proper feast, the end will come. Messiah will come. But these even that stumble, those with discernment, they will be refined as by fire. Because what is God doing? He is refining his people through this time. He is getting the last of the dross off of his people, so that they are ready for the kingdom. Hallelujah. We want to be ready for the kingdom, and we want to be as ready as we possibly can be before these days come. Because when the tests occur, we want to pass the test. Regardless of the outcome to us personally, we want to be able to pass the test when the test comes. So we must be ready. We must know our God. And how do we know our God? We know our God. We obey the commandments and hold to the testimony of Yeshua, the Lamb. Know our God. Know what his word says, and know the warnings within his word. To know that when that false prophet comes, we can be one of those that say, this is what God spoke of. He warned us about this. We need to stand firm. We need to hold on to our God. He is going to send the Messiah, the true Messiah, again, at the appointed time, at the designated appointed time, at the feast of the King. Amen. What's the next feast that needs to be fulfilled? Is it not the Feast of Trumpets, also known as the Day of Coronation, Coronation Day, the wedding day? Isn't he coming back for a bride? At the designated appointed time, he will return, and no one will be able to stop him, because his bride has made herself ready, and so he is coming. She's refined in white linen, and she is ready to receive her groom, her king. But that is what is happening with the dragon, with the beast out of the sea, the Antichrist, with the false prophet, the beast from the land, from the earth, with the image of the beast and the mark of the beast. They all go together. They all go together. Next time we're going to go into chapter 17 and we're going to start talking about Mystery Babylon. Okay? We talked about not being able to buy or sell. Well, this beast system will also have its economic system. Okay? It will have its economic system. So next week we will begin to talk about the Mystery Babylon, the economic system that drives this kingdom. Okay? So until next time, till next week, I hope, ladies, that you have a blessed week. I hope you have a blessed Shabbat. Hope to see you on Shabbat. And I hope you're being able to keep up with the lessons. If not, I hope you're having time to catch up. And may our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God and Father of Yeshua HaMashiach, bless you as you study his word. And may we be prepared for the days ahead, no matter if they're in our generation or another. Let us prepare as if they are spiritually. Let us be ready as if they were in our generation. So ladies, God bless. Shalom.